Welcome to Learning South Africa's Languages, the podcast where we interview learners, teachers, and researchers of South African languages. I'm your host, Michael James, and in this episode, we'll be delving into the life and language learning journey of Duncan Haynes. Duncan is an old friend and was a guinea pig for an experimental introductory Xhosa course I gave in 2018. In this interview, we hear the genesis of his interest in learning Xhosa and his clear interest in the language as a gateway to understanding his own heritage and a very different worldview to his own. Stay tuned for a future episode on how he actually began to learn the language and where that has brought him.
Okay.
So, just starting out, I think, and this is stuff I don't know, because obviously we've known each other quite a long time. How would you give a brief bio of yourself, who you are and where you're from originally? And then maybe you can also weave into that your experience with previous language learning.
Sure.
Other than Xhosa. And then maybe from there, and if you go off on a side track, I'll try and direct you back.
I'll tell you it's related.
Just how to also emerge as something that you wanted to learn.
Geez, eh? Yeah,
Where
there's
do
a
you start
lot.
out?
I suppose in that narrative identity form, and what I'll do is I'll indicate how that is how all of that information that we are going to be looking at now is a very important part of locating yourself, as some people have called it, interestingly, in the Xhosa space, like where you come from, who you are, like your family or your clan or where your place of coming. And so it's an interesting one, because what is the audience that I'm speaking to in that moment? What is my identity that I'm building in that moment? And we come back to this thing of language and identity and how do you feel in those different languages. But as a simple one, I love this one thing of how to tell a true war story. Beautiful. I don't know if you remember from history, but it tells the story and then it comes back with depth each time.
Okay.
This astounding, deeper experience of something. So just let's take the bones. I grew up in town. My brother and I have Zulu names.
Okay.
Which is something I was never comfortable with. Up until
Town being which town?
in Howick, in KZN. And I remember my mom then introducing me to one of the school cleaners. When we gave her a lift down from the school. Maybe it was raining or was it whatever. We picked her up and driving into town from the school into towards a taxi rank. And then my mom's like, "Hey, this is Sipusiso," And then the cleaner was like, "Do they call him that in class?"
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So it was quite an interesting one, not having the language, and having this name.
Yeah.
And I'd say, using that as a form of introduction, perhaps in 2017-18, when I was doing that field work, and then an immersive space. Then I became into that name. So that was something. And
so, the fact that you had that name, does that indicate something about, where you've come from, and the fact that there's certain values about, I guess, locating you within the context where you grew up? And I don't know if you were born there, but it's...
Well, we'll come to that in the second depth of it. So growing up in town, going back to your thing of other languages, like school, I understood that I was terrible at languages.
Yeah.
Retages, as I call them, what do you learn in school? You learn retages, you don't learn languages. And I love this thing, and let's put it on. For me, there's no playful, teaching English as a foreign language, Xhosa as a foreign language. So that would be playful. We've got Seseful, we've got Zeful, but we've got Afeful for Afrikaans. And none of those exist in South Africa. So people just believe they're not good at languages because they're written. And like this incredibly violative thing where maybe you even saying Xhosa, does writing even suit it? You know, like the whole thing of the tones being taken out, like all these complexities. But so I went through school with this very negative idea of language. We grew up in a place where Afrikaans hardly existed at all.
Okay. Did you take Afrikaans at school?
Yeah, I took it through to matric.
Was that because the school almost expected it, or there wasn't Zulu?
There was Zulu. Yeah, no, there was Zulu, and we did Zulu from grades. Well, I went to like a remedial unit for dyslexia, which is quite an interesting one as well, which can come in. And we did, so from grade 3, our school offered it. And then, but it was interesting, this whole, in the Afrikaans space, saying like the Afrikaans teacher telling us in grade 8, well, you guys don't have the vocab, so unfortunately nothing can happen with you. So like it's a hopeless cause.
What if you were to take Zulu instead?
No, Afrikaans.
Afrikaans
and then we proceeded to take it to matric. But like it's quite an interesting view that the children aren't coming equipped with the vocab, so they can't learn the language. And we're just going to open Afrikaans Zulu and Xhosa, and we're going to work from this page until this page. And like if that's what language is, no wonder those teachers were difficult teachers. They were so.
So you had a bad experience then of school language learning.
And like so. There was one story in Afrikaans that captured me. It was like slightly like sensual. Like slightly flirtatious about this guy who's Afrikaans, but he's in London as a taxi driver. These people jump on and say how nice he looks, and they don't know he speaks Afrikaans. Like wow, because like wow, Like there was a one story compared to these other like heart-wrenching, simplistic, very morally simplistic stories.
So it largely failed to capture your imagination as like a subject or something.
Like, and again, this whole where I loved about Michelle Thomas, where it's like the responsibility of the learning is in the teaching, not with you, not with you, the learner. Like, and so for me, like the interest in Afrikaans was something that came more when I was in London after school, and just I was sitting next to someone on the train, and he started speaking to his wife, like, and then he was asking, and Daniel, like, did Daniel get his driver's license? And it was something very special to be able to understand and hear. And I think in some ways then I understood about the power of connection of language. Whereas before, honestly, I had believed that people who didn't speak English somehow thought less complex thoughts than myself. And it was quite an interesting one, like then going to Germany in that year and being in a place where, where people then would try and speak my language, because obviously I couldn't speak much of their language. But I had one or two catchphrases like genau and doch. And once I got into someone's car when I was hitchhiking, and I like used my two phrases, and this lady just spoke German at me for a while until I was like, hey, sorry, do you speak English? And she was like, oh, I thought you were German, And I really enjoyed particularly the Schwäbisch, so this like language which diminutivizes everything. And that for me was interesting because it was so similar to Afrikaans in that way. And I could understand it fairly easily. Like aspects of it, or at least very basics. And then I thought, let me learn it. I was very keen, and I came across Michelle Thomas.
German?
Yeah. I got a recording.
Really? This was like before you came to university?
Yeah, the year before. And then I started listening to it. It was quite inspiring. And then, I realized you could take German. And that was a big one. Like, my mom was like, hey, rather take a BSOC Psi. It's got Psi in it. BA is bugger all. And like, you can learn a language whenever, Like, if you want to speak to those people in Germany, like, you can learn it. Which, is an impossibility, really. particularly in a language like German, feeling proficient because of all the boundaries that are there. I mean, like a lot of South African Germans who've grown up in German homes, like he felt that he didn't speak good enough German, you know, and he went to for like, hey, can I get some German lessons? She was like, no, can you be a tutor rather? So then and through that, then I think I understood the structure of language much better. Like in English at school, we never did accusatives and all of those sort of things.
Okay, so you got to know the grammar and stuff like that.
I understood grammar from a perspective of functionality and where it was actually useful.
As opposed to just kind of
like name the adjectives, name the nouns, like, oh, cool, great.
Conjunctions, parts of speech.
Yeah.
That's really all I remember in terms of what was focused.
I don't even remember conjunctions. Like, you know, and adverb, whatever that is.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, I mean, for me, that, and then I was like, hey, okay, you know, because in the South African context, as much with Afrikaans, with that example of like, hey, you don't have the vocab. And those teachers, I mean, one teacher played us a really nice radio play, you know, like complex about, you know, Nazi Germany and like the complexities of stuff. Like, but I mean, why not do more of that? Like, so in that context, I came across this idea that language in South Africa is something you're born with or not, and particularly.
Okay.
Let's look at African language.
So like language is almost essentialized, it belongs to certain people.
Yeah, you have to be born in a situation to have it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would say African language is this 100%.
Yeah.
Like, you're born in a situation where you have that language. You're born on a farm.
Yeah.
You speak Xhosa. And I didn't
understand.
understand.
You had encountered people who were like that, right?
Yeah, my family.
Okay.
Or aspects of my family. So
that's interesting.
And quite interesting. I mean, then, so, okay. So, but this thing where, no, you'll never speak African language if you weren't born on a farm. Simple. Which, I mean, is true. Like, we come back to your thing.
Well, yeah,
like,
it depends on the nature of the fluency.
Yeah, I say you, Michael, are 1 in a million, you know, so we've got 50 other people like you in South Africa. Well, no, because we don't even have that many whites. Like,
yeah, maybe.
You know, I mean, like, that is the rarity of what you've done. Like, and how you've taken it on yourself to learn in a very novel way and to put your learning in a very novel way. So, for me, that's a stereotype which I think is in some ways valid. We then, with your sort of work, we start understanding why it's a valid stereotype that whites can't speak unless they've grown up in that way. But then, like, I didn't realize how whites who do speak often have a very limited way of speaking.
Yeah, sure.
And I don't think, and often they don't realize that either.
Okay, but you had that an example, but it was people who weren't like you with your
Well, we'll come into the second, let's go into the second layer, the second depth layer. So
I don't want to dwell on this for too long.
Okay.
But
I think it's important. Yeah. So my parents had spent a lot of time in rural areas before I was born. My brother was born in a rural area in a rural hospital in KZN.
Okay.
And then that's why my family had my like these people who were connected with my parents gave us Zulu names, you know. And
that's interesting that it wasn't your parents,
no,
it was these other people. Yeah.
And normally it seems, at least with Zulus, it's like an older, it's like a grandmother figure, older woman figure gives a name.
Yeah.
And this whole thing about a name where this lady in this example, this lady wants a name. She chooses a name. I found that very weird with Chinese. It's like, hey, Alistair, we're going to call you Golden Lion Dragon. We're going to, like, you want a name, we're going to give you a name. Yeah. Rather than, like, a name is something you can't choose. It's something that is, like, is an aspect of your identity that's complex, you know. And courses are very much like this, like children called, like, sadness or pain or, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they grew up in that area with political, like, and they were very unpolitical people.
Okay.
But with the ANC IFP difficulties, they They then left that rural area and moved to another one, which was even more politically hot.
Sure.
And my dad was involved in development work. My mom was involved in like sort of healthcare work. And then, yeah, like again, we were living in a place like in a place, interestingly, between Germans and Zulus. And so in this way, yeah, we were neither of, we had Zulu neighbors, which, was very rare, I was very young then, like 2.
Yeah. Is it, do you formally have it on your birth certificate, or it's
no,
okay.
The name, no.
So it's not official necessarily.
No, exactly.
Exactly.
No. Yeah.
What does
it was kind of
mean?
interesting, this thing of should it be made official so that we can benefit from BEE, and my brother once put it, he like applied, and these complexities, like he applied for an essay writing scholarship, and he put that as one of his names, and he like got second prize. There was a question of like, was that perhaps why he was awarded, so
interesting.
But yeah, then again, like we moved into town, so when I was 2 years old.
Okay.
And I would say perhaps my abilities with pronunciation might be similar to that. I'm very interested in finding out about myself, about whether I have an ability to pronounce things. We were talking about this whole thing of hearing. Hey, come. This thing of hearing certain, that people can hear. Like, because, for instance, my dad can't hear my brother, interestingly, even though he spent more time in the Zulu space than me, significantly more. But he has a stutter, both of them are stuttered. But that, like, they can't hear Zulu words or pronunciation.
Okay.
Hey, come. Let's just pause.
I'll take him with the lead.
Then he'll walk around. So in that way, I was quite interested whether that formulative experience of having like Zulu in my palate, that theory that it helps form your palate. Hey, Peanut, come. That your palate forms at a certain age.
Okay.
I was interested whether that might be a bit of an explanation for my pronunciations. But for instance, it took me a very long time before I could say Xhosa properly.
Okay.
I would say it took like 12 years of practicing, like saying ha, osa, and like this, and then eventually figuring out that that was like in first year doing Xhosa at the roads here, that they say there's
aspiration,
almost like a drawing of the tongue, the aspiration, but this like this like this more of it, like a little bit different. So I think that covers it.
Okay, interesting.
And then like we have this family farm, or my uncle's, and my uncle has this farm, and so my cousin is very fluent, or pretty fluent.
Grew up
on the farm.
The usual story.
Yeah, and
this was something you knew about when you were growing up.
Yeah,
so again,
and my grandfather was particularly fluent, although I didn't really know that about him. Yeah.
Okay. You probably actually hear me saying it funny now. I'm realizing that you're very attuned to pronunciation.
No, I didn't hear. But interesting, in Polish as well, I had this experience where I was like, hey, how do you say this? And the person was like, hey, whoa, but also like speaking Portuguese, like Brazilian Portuguese, like getting the twang that they have. So I really enjoy that. But this whole thing of like saying pouco, and interesting, my dad always stressing about how things are said properly, like, like the focus is on the penultimate vowel, like, okay. And then he's like, there's a double click on pouco, like, okay, however that fits in, like that, po. But interestingly, my dad and his siblings, they weren't allowed to speak Xhosa in the house, even though my grandfather was so fluent, that perhaps it was a part of him. Like when I look at his writings, he uses quite a lot of metaphor. Like he says, like, we should bow down to those animals that those animals that we had on the farm, those particular oxen, the names of which he remembers as a child, and the mother of that ox and everything, and bow low to those animals. And then it's like, oh, whoa. And then I look in that old dictionary, and this kubuda, this word, which means to bow in reverence, but also to the way an ox moves into the load that it's holding.
Okay.
This like acceptance and moving into this like, so I mean, quite a lot of that metaphor coming through.
Sure.
And like this thing of, so the question being, then starting to ask that question around that time of my fieldwork: who was my grandfather?
Okay.
Who is my family? And this whole thing of an aspect of your identity which wouldn't be acceptable in that time. I mean, knowledge around a culture which is deemed inferior, but which people just don't understand, which is too complex to understand for white people.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you'd been around in Xhosa speaking area for a while before you actually did start. I mean, it was very similar to me. Was it on the horizon as something you might do? I mean, you didn't take it as a subject.
I did.
Or you did?
Yeah. I did in.
So was it something that grew over time, kind of an interest, or? I mean, obviously you did research which involved learning, right? But to what extent was the research an opportunity to learn versus it was necessary for the research that you learned?
Completely. The research was an opportunity to learn. Like this way of being able to be in South Africa despite what I look like.
Okay.
To be someone who has a story that is unique.
Okay. That
people then will ask about, other than just like, hey, this is what you look like, I'm going to.
Yeah.
And I mean that inverse of what people assume you're doing to them.
Yes.
And the violativeness of that. And when that person sees what they've done in terms of profiling, that like look of horror on their face is quite something. And I've got a story about that or two.
Yeah.
But going back, so it was definitely, I think another thing was my mum particularly sort of openness towards Sangomas, what they were, that we didn't understand everything about them. And my brother's bipolar. And like in this world, there are explanations for and perhaps healing modalities for how that person can not like healing is one word, but how they integrate that into their life.
Sure, yeah.
To live, And I mean, he's had this since 2012.
Yeah.
So like, how could we try and understand something that would assist? And then, interestingly, Penny Bernard was a lecturer who I'd say was a phenomenal person in the start, where she brought up like she had done her stuff in medical anthropology as like a Sangoma. She went through the process herself and explained sort of patterns of reverence for things and how things are, like how plants are collected in certain ways and how incredibly respectful it is. You don't even let your shadow, you don't point at the plant when you're going there, you don't walk in a straight line to it. When you're collecting it from a mountain, you don't let your shadow fall on it, and you clap to request. This sort of thing where you've got a certain idea about something, about these people destroying nature, illegal harvesting, it's illegal. And then you understand that. So the other thing which was very important in my research was my grandfather's two favorite trees.
Okay.
I found out that the wild olive and the sneezewood, that they are the most important trees for Xhosas.
More so than milkwood?
Milkwood? I don't know about the importance of milkwood.
Okay. But so they would be they're important. What?
So I know that in different areas certain trees have significance.
Okay.
But these two are used in ancestral rituals.
Okay.
For putting meat on top of, and like highly, but they're also very good walking stick ones and that. But just, it was interesting that, my grandfather, he had been born and grown up in a place where it was in a forest as such, near King Williamstown. Historically, they had been harvesters of wood. And then coming back to this whole thing of
So you have deep connections to the Eastern Cape? Then?
Yeah, okay. From, being from 1820 settlers,
Okay.
And so this whole thing, so very interestingly, I mentioned, growing up between a German community and a Xhosa and a Zulu community, a Hlubi community.
Oh wow, okay.
Like, and the tensions there.
Yeah.
And interesting, my grandfather, in the place where they had the farm, it was between a German village and a Xhosa village. I'm trying to find out if it was an Mfengu village, which then would also be Hlubi.
Okay.
So quite interesting, this thing of sort of inheritance, which is a big theme in Xhosa, this like psychic inheritance as such, or situational inheritance, or things which need to be solved in the family, which then are revisited on people. And quite interesting, the farmhouse was the site of the final frontier, or a base for the British.
Okay.
So very, a lot of involvement, a lot of understood involvement.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I was completely unaware of
And I mean, my family were leading Mfengu levies against the Xhosa. So this whole real complexity, and this whole thing of Mfengus as traitors, and, so like a deep, a lot of, which is nice to be able to unpack and express. So I would say that covers a lot of it.
And so to what degree, so you're saying then that your research was in large parts, it would give you an opportunity then to learn more of the language, learn more of the culture, and almost immerse yourself in it.
Yeah, well, and learn the language.
Learn the language. And so that you
Where else would you get it? How else would you do it?
Was it to reach the culture and the history and the understanding of the world behind it? Or to what extent was it an enjoyment for the language learning process? Because you mentioned like the Michelle Thomas method with German, and was it, obviously there can be multiple motivations at the same time, but
I would say one aspect is understanding the healing modality, but only from not often people are like, oh, you want to be a Sangoma, you want to understand everything. No. No, like it's not particularly interesting to me, but I'm interested in this particular context, of my brother's experience.
Yes.
So that's the one. The other, and I'd say humor and connection with people, like when one talks, like that is the interest. That thing of being able to connect. That person who spoke to you about, that they had one teacher who they really connected with at school, and like how that's an everyday experience.
Yes,
and how it really can brighten your work day. Like when you're in Cape Town, you greet the person who's at the security box. So that was, but how then that cultural knowledge, those cultural gleanings, like those then gave me access and people the comfortability, knowing that, what are those trees? And Umtati, the names of them.
In your interactions with people, maybe, and we can actually end on this, I'd like to interview you at a later stage, and we'll get more into actually how you went about learning, because I think, I'm keen to hear more of the specifics of, because it seems like it was a very almost intuitive, and it wasn't necessarily systematic, although there was some elements of it. I was a little bit involved at the start as well.
Yeah.
But I'd rather you talk about that just in terms of the process of doing that, not so much about what I did, but more how you interacted with that method of learning and why it was important. But like when then you've been engaging with people and using the names of trees, and I've had some interactions recently for someone who grew up in a township here, and they don't really know the names of the trees. The ones that they do know, it was because they were involved in planting them specifically. So it was a very kind of functional learning of language, and there's been a loss of a lot of the kind of botanical knowledge, I think, that is contained.
Ethnobotany, as could.
Yeah, and I mean I've been very bookish in my learning of Xhosa, and I've used some specific words for like yellowwood tree or what, and people are like yellowwood or whatever it might be.
When like
so when you use that with people, and you've engaged with people who I think maybe are from town environments as well as rural, how do people respond to the fact that you know it? I mean, to some degree, this is more the product of having learned, and now
but also the learning process, like, and also that thing of, is this person going to be willing to speak to you in Xhosa or not?
Yeah, I mean, there are those more topics that I'm keen to.
But I mean, they're all connected. Like, that person won't be willing until you use a metaphor, and then that person looks, like, okay, like, and this thing of shame around it. I was thinking the other day. I mean, I was very interested. I mean, I have this very close relationship with our domestic worker, who raised me.
Okay.
Yeah. But then we never had access to her language.
Okay, that's interesting.
And
I'd like to return to that maybe as the final thing here as well.
Like just this thing of shame as such, or this potential for hurt. I remember being very interested in the ethnobotany, and she had once told me about certain plants you can use for soap. A certain creeper that you can use for soap. And I asked her about it, and she said, "Hey, are you just wanting to laugh at us?"
Sure.
Like, so that, so I would say a knowledge where one goes beyond that concern. But I would definitely know. So, for instance, I mean, when we're starting to talk about, I'd say a huge aspect of Xhosa is the understanding of the ancestral realm. I'd say that's fundamental. And interesting, Sydney Zotwana, here he is, guide to Xhosa. Xhosa in context. Like, he says, in terms of Xhosa writings, in the first 100 years of literacy, one wouldn't have even known what was censored out. It was so effectively censored. And so in this way, many white people are only on the surface. And this whole thing of deep Xhosa, and then we go into umkwek, or metaphors, and we go into talking about things in deep ways and respectful ways. And so, but the thing is, no one will let you in there. People will deny all of that because you're going to laugh at them. Like, they won't let you in. You can even ask them those words. You can even ask them what their clan name is, and they will tell you that their name is Johannes. And this happens a lot because I'm white, but they would never, with this question, ngumni. They would never say that to a black person, ever. Because that is only one question, and that is, what is your clan? And we then get into really significant stuff about, it's not about you, it's about your clan. It's about something more important than you. It's about spirits inside you. But if you don't know how to follow up and say, no, I'm asking about your clan, then the conversation ends there.
Sure,
and this person's name is Johannes, or July, or, and this whole thing of acknowledging that people have, and let's go back to that thing of me having two names, that people have a different identity as such. But going back to that thing of a huge aspect of Xhosa being ancestral, or around ancestral belief. So we go to this quote from someone who was in anthropology, Jamie Alexander, and she said, it's like a closed door, and you have to show that you know some of what's on the other side before people will let you see that or let you through. Otherwise, they'll never show you the other side of that door.
Sure. Okay.
And they'll be quite judgmental. Like I remember someone saying in the research, like, hey, white people aren't interested in this. I said, really? He said, yeah, no, they're not. Like, they've had black people working for them for years. If they were interested, why didn't they ask? And I was like, yeah, well, I mean, if it's like a shower curtain, and there's stuff on the other side of the shower curtain, how can you ask about it? Particularly when maybe if you ask, people become uncomfortable when you see them. And he was like, okay, yeah.
That's the metaphor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and that was translated from my English with an interpreter. So I had interpreters the whole time I was doing my fieldwork.
Yeah.
But this thing of like this anger, white people don't try to learn this language, And when you do try, then you're not good enough, and people and you aren't interested, and you never, and you don't understand the culture and all of that. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm keen to get more into the reception, I guess, that you've had. But I mean, we've touched on a lot of things already. I'm gonna try and for the next one kind of look back on this and get some things to highlight. But one final thing before we finish up now, and I'll let you go.
Yeah.
I'm curious about domestic work and her presence in your early life. To what degree? Because I mean, your parents sound interesting in that there was an openness to things, whether it be like in the case of your mother, sangomas, and an interest in that, or obviously then with your dad's background, your grandfather, and like kind of that world, and then you having a Zulu name that was given to you through the fact that they were open to Zulu people and black people in general within, I guess, this would have been the latter years of apartheid, I guess. That relationship with your domestic worker, then I'm curious, what did they have any intentions for her to speak Zulu with you? And then what happened there if they did, or if they didn't, why?
Yeah, definitely they wanted, as all people want.
Yeah.
As it's such a theme.
Yeah.
And she said, no, she wants to learn English.
Okay.
Yeah. And her linguistic ability is pretty phenomenal, as someone who's been able to just, without any formal learning, someone who didn't really speak English much at all.
So did she use working then for your family as an opportunity to learn?
Yeah, but like informally.
Okay.
But it's quite interesting just how her ability to understand language without any formal lessons meant like that she had a very high proficiency, or has had.
I guess, which is just really natural. There's this weird thing that I think we've imbibed.
Although we are so used to fossilization on language.
Yeah.
I mean, and it is a theme.
Sure. Yeah.
Particularly when there are, like, I mean, Turkish people who've lived in Germany for 40 years, but really battle to say anything and can't say anything grammatically correct.
Yes,
And I mean, when you are relating to children and you're watching how they learn and the mistakes they make and how they pick them up, and maybe the children talk to you and correct you in ways that are less authoritative or something. But I would say it's a very,
So did she intentionally avoid it then because that was her stated mission? I'm going to learn English.
Yeah, and like this sort of discomfort at me speaking. So it's quite interesting. Like my early, listening to people speaking and trying to repeat it and people being like, well, like quite a negative thing about that, trying to get the sounds and. Yeah, I would say it's only now that we really can switch into things, and that she actually uses quite a lot more, or I can use words and it really makes her happy.
And why would you say that change has occurred? Is it something on her side or your side, or just in the air, in the intervening history of the last, I don't know, decade?
No, I would say it's because I know what I'm saying.
Okay.
Rather than
so almost the maturation then in your language and the things that you are meaning.
And understanding what things mean. And I think this thing of like this glib, I can say these words. Like I remember her responding to, like we had learnt at school, unjani wena, and then ngiyagula, you know. How? Kakubi loko, iphetwe yini, you know. So like you just learn that because I mean that's So you just learn that, and then she would say kakubi, you know. She would like laugh at that, but yeah, you know, like interesting, up until that stage where it's like this person, and coming back to that point you made, like this person is actually interested, invested, and respects this thing.
Okay.
Or understands the has reverence for the potential power of this thing for you know.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's leave it there.
Cool.
I think these dogs are also keen to get out of here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Duncan.
Pleasure, man.
And I'm looking forward to next time we can organize, hopefully when you're in town. I'd like to do it in person again if we can.
Cool.
All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Learning South Africa's Languages. If you enjoyed what you heard, let us know in the comments section or via social media, and please share this with someone you know would be interested in it. If you know anyone who'd be a great guest, please reach out. You can also follow Language Learning SA, which publishes this podcast, on all the main social media sites. Our aim is to centralize information, media, and resources to help learners of South African languages. If you found resources, media, teachers, or schools, or something that helped you or somebody you know, let us know and we'll be sure to add it to our database. Thanks for listening.